Banning TikTok might have just helped other American tech companies or social media companies. It looks like selling it or forcing a sale is also going to help American tech companies.
Creating a enemy, as they did with Russia, as they did with the Middle East, the Muslims, or China, and they're the big boogeymen.
We live in a global age, but they're trying to kind of shoehorn this into the new Cold War with China and the tech war with China. And if we go to war with China, everyone's in big trouble.
Larry Ellison was involved in forcing the sale of TikTok to himself for profit.
We need to scare our enemies into submission, and that's not a very mature way of acting, and I don't think that's how a country like the U.S. needs to act. These tech moguls, they're not big fans of democracy or civil liberties, rather quickly attach themselves to some pretty bad people.
I don't want to spoil it for everyone. Hey, Jacob, welcome back. The celebrity author of Gilded Rage, Elon Musk and the radicalization of Silicon Valley.
Thanks, glad to talk more.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would love to hear a bit more. I know we touched on Larry Ellison and TikTok and their influence in the media. I would love to hear a bit more background about who this Larry Ellison is and his involvement with Trump.
Sure. So Larry Ellison is the one of the founders of Oracle. And Oracle is really an OG tech company, as they might say, been around for a few decades. One of its earliest investors and clients was the CIA. And I mean, it's a company that has mostly been known about providing tech computing services, database management, and later cloud computing. But this is more of a business or government-facing company that has had a relationship with the American state for a very long time. And Larry Ellison, who is, I believe, around 80 or 81, has been very rich for a very long time.
Yeah.
After Trump lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden, there was some reporting in the Washington Post that Ellison held some kind of strategy meeting. It sounded like a bit like a Zoom call, but of people who were trying to overturn the election results. And obviously, we saw that happen, those attempts in various forms, from the January 6th riot to all these legal challenges in various states. And I thought it was important that, it was in a mainstream paper, the Washington Post, but just sort of important to emphasize that, this isn't just another rich guy necessarily who's donating a lot of money. This is one of our new American oligarchs who is also, in some cases, perhaps trying to subvert the democratic process, or at least open to that idea. And I think now in the new Trump administration, of course, Musk gets a lot of the attention, and deservedly so. But so far, Ellison might have benefited more from his partnership with Trump than any other American billionaire or tech leader. In the last Trump administration, there was a deal over TikTok, and the effort to do something about TikTok or to see it as a geopolitical issue has been bipartisan and has covered a couple of different administrations, and Trump has tried to ban it and unban it a couple of times. But one of the first deals he helped make was over something they called Project Texas, which was starting to move TikTok's data to, or at least on U.S. Consumers, to the U.S. And so there was a little bit of a precedent from the first Trump administration for Ellison and Oracle getting involved with TikTok. This was a deal, I think, involving Oracle and Walmart, of all companies.
Interesting. But what year was that? Was it?
That should have been during the first Trump administration. So it might have been 2018, 2019 or so.
Wow.
But it wasn't the full divestment of TikTok from its Chinese owners that people wanted. It wasn't a full ban either. It sounded like the equivalent of TikTok maybe renting storage and cloud computing services from Oracle here in the U.S. But Trump really had an about face on TikTok, actually partially because of Jeffrey Yass, YASS, who's someone I discuss in the book and who I've written about. Yep. He's the richest man in Pennsylvania. He's known for options trading and is kind of a traditional Wall Street guy who then went to found a company called Susquehanna in Pennsylvania and is a billionaire many times over. He's also a tech investor, which is less well known, but his company invested either directly in TikTok or it might have been in ByteDance. And he was the one who, during the 2024 election cycle, at least by most accounts, met with Trump and said, hey, you really got to change your mind about banning TikTok, or we got to make this. And this is when the Biden administration was working to ban TikTok.
Got it.
And Trump came out of that meeting with Jeffrey Yass and some of his associates and said, we can't ban TikTok, or because that's just gonna. At the time, he said that's gonna help. I think he said Zucker schmuck. That might have been when he coined Zucker schmuck. And there was, as impolitic as that was, there is a point there, which is that banning TikTok might have just helped other American tech companies or social media companies. It looks like selling it or forcing a sale is also going to help American tech companies. I mean, that's kind of how things go. But that was when Trump had his big turn, and there are other people in Republican politics like Vivek Ramaswamy and others were saying, look, we got to embrace TikTok. Young people are on there. We just got to cleave it away from China. So by the time we come to the current Trump administration and the actual effort to move TikTok over to something like U.S. ownership, it seems like ByteDance might still be involved, but perhaps the algorithm and certain assets will be controlled and owned here in the U.S. But Larry Ellison and Oracle really became kind of the leading partner there. In a way, credit to Larry Ellison for seeming to maintain this very profitable relationship with Trump and the Trump administration without all the upheaval of someone like Musk is having. But I think that's why I talk about him, and why there's been some pretty good coverage of Ellison, and why people need to kind of keep their eye on what he's doing, because he's going to be a very important figure throughout this administration. Also on the Stargate project, this big build out of compute capacity for AI. That's something that they're now very committed to financially. So he's not a young man, but we're gonna keep hearing about him, I think, throughout this administration.
Yes, particularly with his son involved.
Yeah, excuse me for not mentioning that.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. Actually, we'll go more into his son as well. But I was thinking, do you feel that Larry Ellison was involved in forcing the sale of TikTok to himself for profit? Because TikTok, the owners, essentially had a choice, and it wasn't even Chinese owned. I think the guy's Singaporean anyway, so that's a side topic. I believe it's it's the boogeyman China. But however, having said that, he forced the sale of an extremely profitable TikTok US at, I believe, below the price was below the revenue or something below one. It
was very strange. Yeah, I mean, J.D. Vance, I believe, was being credited with saying one of the numbers, 14 billion, which is very low for a company like that. I mean, it really does seem like for two reasons. One is to get a very valuable asset with a lot of people using it away from China. But the other one is really the geopolitical angle, which is, there's been tons of concern about the kind of political content on TikTok from elites in tech and government. And at first it was, China. They were calling it digital fentanyl. I mean, they're trying to kind of, as you said, the ownership situation is a little more complicated. I mean, there are American investors besides Jeffrey Yass in TikTok. We live in a global age, but they're trying to kind of shoehorn this into the new Cold War with China and the tech war with China into that narrative. But then, there was this talk that, China's going to bewitch America's youth or take all of our data. But then you had some people very bluntly say, powerful people like Mitt Romney when he was a senator, or Senator Mark Warner, who's a Democrat on the Intelligence Committee and a longtime Democratic stalwart, say, actually, there's too much pro-Palestinian content on there. And this was, something that started almost as a rumor at first. And
when was that? Because I recall, was it, what's his name? The CEO of ADL, Anti-Defamation.
Oh, Jonathan Greenblatt.
It was.
He's probably said the same thing, frankly, but I wouldn't know the date.
Yeah, exactly. I believe he came out saying we have a TikTok problem.
Yes, and when you first started hearing about that perhaps a year or two ago, certainly after October 7th, you think like, well, let's have some evidence or not just be conspiratorial. But then people come out and say it, like, especially when someone like Mark Warner says it. I'm like, oh, okay, you are a powerful senator, so that's why you approve of this. I mean, we know that the sort of bipartisan consensus, at least in the political establishment here, is largely pro-Israel and not very concerned with the genocide in Gaza or what's happening to Palestinians. But, here they are saying it.
Mike, how did that legislation pass so quickly? If this is correct and there's not a lot of people that understand, somebody understood something.
I want to see if you're going to tell the real story. Okay, well, first of all, let the record
We're talking about
reflect.
TikTok legislation.
I left.
There's no AI legislation.
Senator, I left to produce more human beings, and they cost money. They're not making me money. And if everyone had followed Frank and my Irish Catholic lead and repopulated the earth, we would have already won this Cold War competition. How did it pass so quickly? I know we're running out of time. One, we stole the senator's work, and he did a lot of sincerely, a lot of yeoman's work in drafting an initial bill. We were able to sort of learn from that experience. We refined the approach. We worked with him. We worked with the executive branch. So we had a bipartisan consensus. We had the executive branch, but the bill was still dead until October 7th. And people started to see a bunch of anti-Semitic content on the platform. And our bill had legs again. And then there was a huge miscalculation by TikTok. When it became apparent that we were going to pass it out of committee, they forced sort of a pop-up on the app that allowed people to call their members of Congress. And kids were calling into their members of Congress during school hours, threatening to commit suicide if TikTok went away. And for those of us who are concerned about the use of this platform for propaganda purposes or brainwashing, it sort of proved the point in the moment, and suddenly the bill passed. So it was the threat of espionage, the threat of propaganda, the good work of Senator Warner, and a few other players that all conspired.
And then more recently, you had Benjamin Netanyahu, when he was at the UN, give this little press conference and talk about TikTok and social media as a battleground and all the things we kind of know instinctively or that sometimes report on. I mean, every country is doing social media operations and influence operations and bots, especially the US. But some of the stuff isn't always in the open there you have Netanyahu saying we need to win there and we need, TikTok's going to become more of our friend.
We have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are the social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is TikTok. TikTok, number one.
And there are also examples of countries like Israel and elsewhere talking behind the scenes to the leadership of these companies or trying to get their people to be, say, like the local country representative for TikTok or Facebook or whatever else it might be. So, this stuff does happen more in the shadows, I'd say, but it has been very revealing to see that in the open. Yes. And I still wouldn't discount the China side and how that is important to people in power, even if I wasn't very worried about, about the threat of China. I mean, if we go to war with China, everyone's in big trouble.
Yeah.
It's not going to be just about TikTok. There are a lot of Chinese apps on people's phones. That's another reason why I think this felt kind of narrowly targeted.
But do you believe, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure it's true. What I believe is playing out is creating a enemy, as they did with Russia, as they did with the Middle East, the Muslims, or China, and they're the big boogeymen, and we blame everything on them, and we can pass laws in order to survey the general population, in order to force sales, which we would like. Do you see any of this playing out except for the TikTok?
I think especially when you put it straightforwardly like that. I mean, the U.S. is a lot of countries have always looked for enemies, whether within or without, especially to pass certain laws or crack down civil liberties or advance certain policies or foreign policy. And there's still a lot of focus on the Muslim world or Islamophobia or supposed radical Islamic terrorism was the phrase of choice like 10 years ago. But we can see even the MAGA types kind of pivoting away from the Middle East and being much more about China. And it's something that has bipartisan appeal, unfortunately. And is very convenient. It's very dangerous, I think, because look, we are very different in some ways, but our governments our economies are very intertwined. They are the workshop of the world, and I don't know, a lot of this stuff. I don't know how we settle some of these things. Like, during the Cold War, we were waiting for the Soviet Union to collapse, I suppose, and trying to avoid war with them. But how do we win the AI race, or how does someone win the AI race? They create AGI, and then everything's settled. Like, it just seems like we've created and maintained these tensions, especially over tech and chips and this form of trade that keeps the tension ratcheted up, but doesn't necessarily have an off ramp or an endpoint. There could be diplomatic ways to negotiate over these kinds of issues, But instead, I think, as you're describing, that more sort of extreme or brute force methods are preferred. We're not going to necessarily negotiate with China over data collection practices or cyber attacks or espionage or even the ownership of TikTok. We're going to pass a law here in the U.S. that forces a change.
Yeah.
And, I just don't think that's very productive behavior.
No.
It's certainly of a piece with how the U.S. and how the Republican Party operates, but even as a superpower, especially as a superpower, you can be a skillful and peaceful diplomatic and political operator if you wanted to. We don't have, but the new attitude, both in politics and in tech, like you hear from Alex Karp or someone or Palmer Luckey at Honor, we need to scare our enemies into submission. And that's not a very mature way of acting, and I don't think that's how a country like the U.S. needs to act. Is like, we have a lot going for us and a lot of influence without, threatening to launch missiles at people.
I would like to thank Paradex, the decentralized crypto exchange who is sponsoring this episode. Decentralized exchanges avoid you giving control of your crypto to a centralized exchange. You remain in control of your private keys, not the exchange. This means your crypto always remains in your control, so avoids the risk of FTX type fraud. Paradex's vision is to be the everything app for crypto. Spot, perps, options with deep liquidity, self-custody, and capital efficiency. Trade 250 markets on a super exchange with better than centralized exchange liquidity, institutional grade privacy, all on a fast blockchain. Paradex has a number of exciting features for traders to use, such as vaults. Vaults are where you can deposit your capital to generate passive income. Paradex has their own vault with $50 million locked up, and user community-led vaults which generate a return based on their investment strategy. But remember guys, crypto futures options are risky. Always do your own research before investing and only invest what you can afford to lose. This is not intended to be financial advice, and always consult a professional about your local country rules and with your regulators. I think Alex Karp, his quote was something to some extent, scare your enemies and sometimes kill them.
Palantir is here to disrupt and make the institutions we partner with the very best in the world, and when it's necessary, to scare our enemies and on occasion kill them.
And what's the byproduct of that also is you're scaring people in the U.S. too, I think.
No, absolutely.
I mean, that kind of stuff certainly disturbs me when I hear people like that, because we also know from a lot of these tech moguls that they're not big fans of democracy or civil liberties, even though some of them claim to come from like libertarian politics. And if they're so cavalier about the lives of other people overseas, they don't seem that much more concerned about freedom here at home, and they seem to rather quickly attach themselves to some pretty bad people and people who are right now as we speak, cracking down on freedom and civil liberties here at home. So, they try to make themselves seem like nationalists, like, oh, they're protecting the homeland by being these fierce warriors on our behalf. But I don't find that a very convincing talk or argument.
Yeah, it's a great pretense in order to crack down on civil liberties, increase surveillance. I guess though. What have you seen any of this with the ICE and
I think that there's broad support among a lot of tech elites, and certainly not much criticism of what's happening with ICE. One thing that I note in the book, and I think it's very revealing now, is that someone like Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, attended somewhat quietly, but he attended a protest at San Francisco airport during the first Trump administration, during the first Muslim ban. And he said, I was a refugee because he was a Jew who fled Soviet Russia, where Jews were somewhat oppressed there. And he said, I'm here to support refugees. He spoke to a journalist briefly. And now he has attended meetings with Trump and with other Google Alphabet leadership. A complete 180. And we have an even worse Muslim ban now, and even worse crackdowns on civil liberties and immigration and rights of minorities here. So, there's a definite sense, I think, among some of these tech guys. Some of them agree with Trump. Some of them are a little exhausted with politics, I think. And some of them want to be paid up participants in what we're seeing right now. So a company like Palantir has had contracts with the Border Patrol before with the U.S. government. They are glad to provide, tech and database services to help track migrants and to help arrest and deport those people. And I think you see that in other parts of the tech industry where they see opportunity now. That some of them might grouse a little bit privately or not feel entirely comfortable with what's going on, but they are still going after national security related programs or working for the U.S. military, if not directly for ICE or federal agencies that are participating in deportations. And they don't seem to be speaking up also on behalf of their own employees. I mean, they care about H-1B visas, but there are also a lot of migrants and immigrants who work low-level jobs at tech companies, serving food, guarding campuses, all kinds of things. And I think from corporate America, we don't necessarily expect the height of public ethics and to stand up for things, but we are really experiencing silence, if not full collaboration now.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen it. It's very strange. I mean, the younger generation, they have opened their eyes, especially with social media. Very, all these students, and generally they raising their voice. And I think it's America. You do see that they kind of lead the way. The students, they and the British as well. They're quite well outspoken. Which is great to see. But I think that a lot of the leaders, they're kind of fully on board with Trump's narrative.
And I think that's worth noting that the rank and file sometimes at these companies, I mean, because, these are companies that employ tens of thousands of people, are often different, especially the younger people in their beliefs. And there is also more diversity, I would say, in political and social beliefs. I wrote an article over the summer about Shaun Maguire, this very voluble and, in the eyes of a lot of people, bigoted venture capitalists, who says a lot of extreme things and has accused Zohran Mamdani and his father of being terrorist sleeper agents and, ridiculous stuff that probably if it were said by about another population, he would no longer be there. But and I talked to a fair number of people, and what you hear from kind of either from or about tech elites is that a lot of them agree with him and sort of he speaks for them, but also and that it hasn't necessarily harmed his role there. But then I spoke to other people, including a number of Muslim people in tech, who of course don't like what they're hearing and have this. There's a growing political rift that no matter what side you're on, like this is going to be a consequential thing, I think, for tech, which is that not everyone is on board with how tech leaders are aligning themselves with the Trump administration, or having contracts for the U.S. military or having contracts for the IDF. And for a while, I think tech companies can kind of bulldoze their way over over dissent from employees. Google fired about 40 or 50 people after a silent protest last year. But eventually this is going to be a real thing, and of course there are a lot of Muslim people in tech.
And and it is Muslim, but I don't think it's only, it's people who just generally just I see a lot Paul Graham.
Yes, he's a good example.
He's a really great example, good, well-spoken. I think the British generally, I've found that they're much more, we generally side with the oppressed.
Yeah.
Hope so anyway, but I like to do that. I did it with the FTX credits, and generally I feel a lot of empathy with people suffering, and I see Paul Graham and I see quite a few others who I believe generally what I foresee. I don't know if you see this, and you did mention about there's a rift in tech, but potentially you'll see a lot of young Americans, young British, just generally people boycotting the companies which are complicit in this, and it will lead to a growth of maybe I don't know, not necessarily Chinese company, but other companies which are the leaders.
I think it's possible. And I mean, Paul Graham is a good example also because, he's not some raging lefty. And he's a very wealthy tech figure who I think speaks rather plainly about how he's very upset about the Israeli war in Gaza. And then you see some of the responses to him, including from some of his colleagues, or, someone like Joshua Wolf, who was recently posted a doctor's screenshot about the founder of Replit, and then when people told him this was fake, he didn't take it down. I mean, there's sort of an extremism and a lack of professionalism, I'd say, on that side that doesn't really bring any consequence. But I have seen a little bit. Of course, there's protests happening, but also there have been some high-profile people quitting from some of these companies, and also I've seen there a couple of organizations popping up offering to basically do job finding services or job placement services for people who are like, hey, I'm not really comfortable working on cloud computing for the IDF via Microsoft. Like, can I get a job at a new startup that's a little bit more ethically minded?
Yeah,
and so there is a little bit of that going on. That it hasn't made a huge dent, I would say, but I think you're right that there's going to be some change, certainly in the culture and where people put their money and where people put their time and attention, because there are all kinds of people who don't necessarily want to be standing for this stuff or working on it.
Yeah, because I think it's started with we see it playing out with Starbucks. I mean, Starbucks is I foresee it's going to be like bankrupt in like 3-5 years. Who's going to go to Starbucks anymore? And I think there might be some ripple effects in the other. Maybe it's more difficult to overthrow certain giants.
Sure.
But I do see certain people aren't happy just generally. I mean, it's just
And I think consumers want choices too, and whether it's in tech or anywhere else. And, not everyone is the most conscious consumer. Sometimes you got to buy from Amazon or Walmart or whatever. But people do like having choices, and social movements can spring up or protests against companies. People in tech, I've seen it with Uber, for example. So I think, as this stuff enters more popular discourse and mainstream consideration, you're going to see some of that kind of discontent too among consumers.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Jacob. It was a pleasure having you on board. And everyone, but please buy Jacob's book. A celebrity here. No, it's a fantastic book as well. Honestly, it's funny as well. I could go through. I don't want to spoil it for everyone, but you have a few humorous quotes.
I try to entertain a little bit, especially with these heavy subjects. And I'm genuinely appreciative that people take the time when there's a lot of demands on people's time. And it can be hard to find time to read a book or listen to the audiobook, which I also narrate. But I'm really appreciative when people take the time to engage with it.
No, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you again soon. And everyone follow Jacob on Twitter, buy his book, and thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Take care.